So Frank is a human rights lawyer from a chambers called Garden Court. You may well have heard of Frank recently because he was one of the lawyers who was behind challenging the prescription of Hamas. I'm going to let Frank speak about that and about some of the public reaction in response to that, but it is beautifully simple. But I'm going to let Frank speak about that in his own words, about what was the rationale behind that, what does it actually mean, rather than the hyperbole that the right-wing press chucked out.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be here. It's great to share this space with all of you. I will explain the application that Hamas are bringing under the Terrorism Act, but I suppose it's good to start by just creating a bit of empathy and sitting with how we're all feeling. We're in the middle of a genocide, which is really horrific. I personally feel quite exhausted. I think I'm working too much. I feel this weird sense of survivor's guilt. Like there's something quite surreal about being in this very peaceful, sunny field in England and having an amazing time on a beautiful August day while people are being massacred in Palestine. Like I think it does something to us. And I was saying to Fréa earlier, I think there's almost a need for us to compartmentalize to be able to function in these astonishing circumstances in which we find ourselves. So forgive me if I do seem a bit exhausted. It's because I am. Like I'm staying up far too late, working on too many cases, trying to work as effectively as I can, but feeling guilty that I haven't done more. And I'm sure there's a lot of similar feelings in this room. So I just want to sit with that. And then I guess I also wanted to check in with how people are feeling about the prospects of the Palestinian struggle. I thought the last panel, for those of you who heard it, was in some ways quite hopeful. And so I suppose maybe, and forgive me if this is really obnoxious and annoying, but by a show of hands, I think there's sort of two spectrums, right? There's the hopeful end of the spectrum, people who feel hopeful about the prospects of Palestinian liberation, and then there's the kind of despairing end of the spectrum, people who sort of feel like there's no end in sight, seems like the genocide is in full swing and there's nothing we can really do about it. So can I just check, like, who's more towards the hopeful end of the spectrum? And who is more... And who's more towards the kind of despair end of the spectrum? Okay, that's good to know. So a lot of despair in the room. All right, well, it's good to acknowledge that, all right? I guess speaking plainly, honestly, my hope is to try to leave us all feeling slightly more hopeful after we leave this conversation than when we went into it. And I would say that it's easy to lapse into despair, like the situation is really horrific. But as someone who is living in Britain, I don't feel... like I almost have the right to despair, right? Like despairing is when you give up hope, and I feel this weird sense of duty to cultivate hope in solidarity with Palestinians, and I hope that that's what we can do here, is to try to collectively embolden each other to be more hopeful and to continue struggling against the fascist ideology of Zionism, struggling against the colonial apartheid state of Israel, because it's our duty not to abandon Palestinians, whatever it is that we can do. We have to try and escalate. We have to try to find a way to escalate our opposition to this genocide, and we have to ask that question: what can I do to escalate? In a collective way, we have to transform that into the question: what can we do to escalate? And so it's amazing to have this space where we can try and think collectively for a moment. But what does it mean for us to escalate our opposition to Zionism and the apartheid state of Israel? But also, crucially, the United States, NATO, the entire system of capitalist imperial class relations that allow this genocide, that facilitate this genocide, that enact this genocide, right? So, sorry, that was a very long-winded way of coming to the point of your question, which was about one of my clients, right? So I was instructed to represent Hamas under the Terrorism Act 2000. I guess in the course of this conversation, it would be good for us to explore that act quite a lot. It's something that a lot of us are talking about recently. It's not just been used to attack Hamas. It's also used to attack Palestine Action at the moment. It's being used to attack Liam Ogue from Kneecap. It's all the same act, okay? And to summarize my client Hamas's case in a nutshell, it's that, well, there are sort of three aspects to it, all right? The first aspect is to do with international law. I would say that we should be extremely critical of international law. It was created by colonial empires. Like, international law is not really our friend. We should be extremely critical if and when we intervene on the terrain of international law. But broadly, it's a contradictory site of struggle. It's a space where we can contest and we can fight our enemies, basically, on the terrain of international law, international humanitarian law. And what's clear is that Palestinians have a right under international law to use armed force to resist the people who are colonizing them, the people who are enacting a genocide against them. So that's ground one of the argument really is that the decision to prescribe Hamas, to make it illegal to be a member of Hamas, is a sort of contravention of international law, right? The second ground is about human rights, and in some ways that's more to do with the human rights of people in Britain, right? Like the Terrorism Act is a full frontal assault on your right to speak freely, right? You have a human right under Article 9 of the European Convention to manifest your beliefs, and you have a human right under Article 10 to express yourself, right? Free speech. And what the Terrorism Act does is to make it a criminal offence under Section 12 to express support for a prescribed organisation. So the British state knows what it's doing. It's trying to make all of you feel nervous about the conversation we're having right now. It's trying to make you feel like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't talk about Hamas. I shouldn't talk about Palestine action. That's the deliberate function of the Terrorism Act 2000, and that's the effect that it's clearly having when it comes to Hamas. People are terrified to talk about this. They're worried that they'll be committing a Section 12 offence if they say what they actually think. It's also the case that some people don't necessarily politically support Hamas, but still think that any negotiated political resolution to the Palestinian struggle is going to require talking to an organisation that wins elections. And again, the British state, knowing this, has tried to suppress Hamas and tried to prevent us in this country from talking about it. So that's the second ground, right? It's human rights type grounds. And it's not limited to free speech arguments. We also put some really important stuff in there about human dignity. Like in some ways, humans obviously have a need for dignity. And in some ways, dignity is quite an ephemeral, quite an abstract concept. But in other ways, it's actually really common sense. Right? I think we all have some kind of concept of dignity, and we all know indignity when we see it, right? We know that herding 2 million people, like 2 million humans, like herding them into a concentration camp and telling them that they're human animals, that they're not fully human, that it's a problem that they're not Jewish, like that's undignified. And so we talk about that. We talk about the Palestinian need for dignity and Hamas as an expression of the human need for dignity, right? And we end our submissions by talking about how if Hamas didn't exist, the Palestinian people would invent it, right? Like you can't put people in these conditions and expect them not to find ways to violently reassert their humanity, right? That's a very relatable thing. So that's the second ground, human rights, a kind of various arguments relating to human rights. And then the third argument is quite practical. It's sort of looking at the practical effects of the prescription, in particular, the urgent need to try and get aid into Gaza and the way that the prescription regime makes it very, very difficult to do that, right? There's reports of charities being investigated because the suggestion is that they might be sending material support to Hamas, even though Hamas forms the government practically in Gaza because it won an election, right? And so that's a key through line through all of this, right? Like I think the obvious fact is that Hamas won an election. Like there hasn't been elections in Gaza these last 2 decades because it's been crushed by a 17-year siege, right? But the fact is that, you know, the story is that Condoleezza Rice, right, the U.S. Secretary of State, I think at the time, fell off her treadmill. She was on an exercise treadmill. She fell off her treadmill when she heard the news that Hamas had won the election, right? So it's this classic thing that we see throughout history, like this attempt to suppress political manifestations that imperialist powers don't like. I don't want to waffle on about it too much, but we wrote the documents in that application to be accessible to ordinary people. We didn't want to hide it behind legal jargon. We wanted to make clear, obvious arguments about why the decision to malign Hamas as terrorists needs to come to an end. It needs to be reversed. And in support of the application, we solicited the assistance of 20 expert evidence. I've never seen so many experts supporting a single case. The experts included anti-Zionist Jews like Avi Shleim, who's obviously a very well-known historian of the Palestinian struggle. It included eminent jurists like John Dugard, who's one of the South African lawyers who represented South Africa before the ICJ, alleging that the Zionist entity is engaged in genocide. And we made all of the documents that I'm talking about available online. So if you want to read these arguments, like I said, we wrote them to be accessible. We wrote them so that people could educate themselves about the reality of what Hamas is, what they stand for, their strategy, like what they say Palestinian liberation looks like, the fact that they expressly commit themselves to a long-term truce, right? They're not interested in in prolonging conflict. They want what's called a hudna, which is a kind of Islamic truth under under Islamic jurisprudence. So you can access all of those documents by going on the website if you want to educate yourself about what Hamas say in their own words and what we said in our attempt to represent them to the courts of the British Empire that colonized Palestine. So the website is hamascase.com, and you can just download all the documents if you go to that website.
One other aspect of it that I think is really interesting is it speaks about the impact for the prescription on communities in this country. And that's one other aspect of it that came through about what it means for various communities around the UK. And do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of the point about human rights. Like, it's just very, very difficult to talk about Hamas under the current regime. And like I said, it's an intentional full frontal assault. But I think maybe, I must admit to having been a bit disappointed by the apparent lack of courage by some politicians when it comes to supporting this application. Like, I think that's what's most needed. And in particular, it's surprising to me that more politicians from the Irish Republican tradition have not been willing to speak up in support of this. I'm pivoting slightly from your question because I think what's perhaps helpful for people is to understand the history of the Terrorism Act 2000 and the way that it was a consolidation of precursor legislation that was applied in the north of Ireland. So in the 1970s, there was emergency legislation that was imposed by the British Empire on my homeland. I come from the occupied north of Ireland. And there was this attempt to sort of suppress the threat from Irish republicanism. And the precursor legislation looks awfully like the Terrorism Act 2000, right? It's this power to designate an entire organization, and then membership of the organization becomes illegal. And the reason that the British Army, the British Empire did that in Ireland was because there was this very sophisticated anti-colonial movement that posed an existential threat to the British colonial presence in Ireland, right? This kind of like, these groups like the Provisional IRA and the Irish National Liberation Army that were trying to remove the British presence, right? And originally, the British state treated those groups like they were soldiers in an army, because that's what they were, right? IRA, Irish Republican Army, Irish National Liberation Army. So they treated them like POWs, and they interned them without charge or trial, right? Operation Demetrius is 1971, and they just, the British colonial presence just lifts thousands of people out of their homes and puts them in an internment camp without charge or trial. And so in recognition of the fact that they weren't following proper judicial processes, they bestowed this so-called special category status on the people that they had detained in that way. But then they realized that they've sort of made a mistake because they've bestowed this legitimacy on the army that they're fighting by giving them, POW status in all but name. And so it was these 5 demands, right? Right not to wear a prison uniform, right not have to do prison work, all this kind of stuff that was recognized by the Geneva Conventions, right? You're not allowed to treat prisoners of war like ordinary prisoners. And then in 1976, the British government tries to take that away, removes special category status, and that leads to the blanket protest, right, where members of the Irish Republican tradition who were detained in Long Kesh prison in the north of Ireland, they refuse to wear prison uniforms, which means they're not allowed to go to the toilet because they have to walk down the hall to do that. And so they're on the blanket. So they're just wearing blankets because they've been deprived of clothes. And they're also not allowed to go to the toilet, hence the dirty protest, right? They're just forced to go to the toilet in their own cells, right? And then that escalates in 1981 with the famous hunger strike in which 10 comrades die on hunger strike, including Bobby Sands, not before Bobby Sands gets elected to the colonial British Parliament and thereby sort of destroys the Thatcher government's attempt to suggest that the IRA are illegitimate, right? So can you see the way history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? It's like there's this attempt by the same British Empire that's doing the genocide in Palestine now is saying to the Irish people, like, this armed anti-colonial resistance is illegitimate. It's actually just criminal. They're just terrorists. They have no support. And then Bobby Sands, at the age of 27, from a prison cell, gets elected to Parliament and demonstrates the sheer scale of Irish Catholic support for the IRA, right? So what's interesting to me is that analogy, right? The IRA have this infamous slogan. They said they were going to seize power with the Armalite in one hand and the ballot box in another. So an Armalite is a machine gun. So they're saying, we don't renounce armed struggle, but we also recognize the value of contesting elections. And then they have this policy, which they observe to this day, of abstentionism, where they run for election in the constituency of the north of Ireland and then refuse to take their seats because they say that the colonial parliament has no legitimacy, right? What's interesting to me is the difference between Ireland and Palestine. There are some similarities, but there are some important differences, like the obvious one being the sheer scale of the violence that is being enacted on the people of Palestine. I think it would be crass to make any kind of direct comparison. The struggle in the north of Ireland, certainly from the 60s onwards, was a low-intensity civil conflict. It's not like what we're witnessing in Palestine. It's not genocide and it's not mass murder. There's an argument to be made for saying that British policy towards Ireland in the 18th century, 19th century was perhaps genocidal, but not in the 20th and 21st century. The difference, I think, a crucial difference, is British policy towards the political wing of these Irish Republican groups, Irish Republican Socialist Party and Sinn Féin, was not to prescribe the political wing, only to prescribe the military wing. And I think in part that's because the success of these political wings within the territory of the so-called United Kingdom posed this kind of constitutional crisis for the British Empire, right? It's like if you say to the IRA, why are you using violence? Why don't you just participate in the supposedly democratic political process? And then the IRA says, okay, Bobby Sands gets elected, subsequent politicians get elected, and then you say, no, not like that, we're going to ban you. It just looks like you're being insincere, right? So they were like, oh, we really, really want to ban the Sinn Féin. And they really thought about it. The British Empire came very, very close to banning Sinn Féin and making it illegal to be a member of Sinn Féin, but they didn't. What they've done with Hamas, in 2001 they added the military wing, but they didn't add the political wing. So they observed the same policy. And then 20 years later, Priti Patel comes along, if you've heard of her, right? Disgraced Zionist politician. She, at one point, lost her ministerial job because of her illicit dealings with the Zionist entity. She comes back into government as a minister through Boris Johnson, and she's the one who makes the decision to make the political wing illegal. So this is the political wing of Hamas, which has won elections, right? Stunned Condoleezza Rice won an election, and the British government departs from its long-standing policy and says, we're going to make it illegal to be a member of this organization that the Palestinian people voted for. So, I mean, ask yourselves, like, who does the British Empire think it is to tell the Palestinian people who they should vote for? Who does the British Empire think they are to lecture Palestinians on the question of violence? Like, is that some sick joke? Like, the British Empire, which colonized almost half the world, engaged in some of the most systematic racist mass murder that humans have ever seen, right? That's not some exaggeration. Like, it's an extremely violent colonial empire, presided over extreme economic mass murder, right? Think about the Irish famine. Like, the population of Ireland in 1845 was bigger than it is today, right? That's how devastating the Irish experience of British colonialism really is, right? And think about India. Like, tens of millions of people starved in British-imposed famines as they're engaged in this colonial plunder of India. Tens of millions of people, and that's just the economic murder. That's to say nothing of all of the explicit military violence, right? The creation of the concentration camp, right? It wasn't the Nazis who invented concentration camps. It was the British Empire that invented concentration camps. So these people, these psychotic, mass-murdering British colonizers, see fit to lecture my client, Hamas, the IRA, like all of these anti-colonial resistance movements. Nelson Mandela, right? That was another so-called terrorist who was maligned by the British Empire as, as a terrorist rather than the freedom fighter that he was, right? So that's I think, in some ways hopeful, because it's a sign of the depth of the crisis of Zionism that they feel the need to start making it illegal to vote for people that they don't like, which is what they've done with Hamas. But it's also disturbing. It's a really disturbing full frontal assault on Palestinian democracy. It's not for the British Empire to decide who the Palestinians should vote to represent them. It's not for the Zionist colonizers to tell Palestinians who should represent them. It's for the people of Palestine to determine who should represent them.
So that has probably been one of the most newsworthy. Obviously, the right-wing press hated it. Do you want to speak a little bit about some of your other clients and the cracks that they're revealing in the Zionist machine at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say about 75-80% of all of my cases at the moment relate to the Palestinian struggle, representing anti-Zionist clients. I think one of the most useful things I can talk about is the work I've been doing representing ordinary people who get fired from their jobs for slagging off Israel and Zionism on social media or saying something internally to the company about the genocide that we're witnessing. Because I think that's something that we can all sort of relate to. Like most, and I don't want to make assumptions, some people are unemployed, some people choose not to work, but a lot of us as the international working class spend a lot of our time in jobs. Like that's a massive part of our experience of the world, is that we have to do jobs for one reason or another. And there is a crisis of free speech in this country when it comes to Palestine. It's not just that it's illegal to talk about Hamas in certain ways, right? You're not allowed to express support for Hamas, and you're not allowed to be reckless as to whether or not an opinion that you express might encourage others to support Hamas. It's not just that more obvious crisis of free speech. It's also that loads of people are being fucking fired, if you'll excuse my French, for speaking up against a genocide, right? And so my experience is that there is a slight problem in this country, which is that there is a lack of disciplined anti-Zionist lawyers who are willing to run these cases in a way that's principled. And I think when we do run them in a principled way, that's how we win. So what sometimes happens is someone gets into trouble at work because a social media post has been brought to their attention by one of these malicious Zionist groups that go around doxing people. And there's this strategic question of, okay, what do you do in that situation? Like, am I going to react sort of defensively and say, oh, I'm sorry, I think this post can be explained. I didn't mean it that way. These Zionist groups are saying that it's anti-Semitic. But, like, that's one response, is to put in a tactical apology. I hope I wasn't misinterpreted. I didn't mean to come across as anti-Semitic. That's not what I meant. And the alternative approach is just to go on the offensive. And I think that tends to be the correct approach. It's almost always the right strategy. Just go on the offensive. And in particular, I think we need to be making arguments about Zionism in court, which I've been trying to do, and with a lot of success, to be honest. I think you just go into court and say, Zionism is fascist, it's certainly racist, it's colonial, it's racist to its core, it's an inherently racist ideology, and it's not worthy of respect in a democratic society, which is part of a specific legal test, which is actually quite useful to just go into court and say, we have a legal framework for determining when beliefs are worthy of respect, and Zionism is not worthy of respect. We should just be going into court and arguing that. And you argue it in these employment tribunal cases because it's the winning strategy. Like, employers aren't used to being criticized in this way. And what you almost always have in these cases is comparators, right? When you're alleging discrimination, you tend to compare the treatment that you experienced or your client experienced to that of other people in different situations, right? And what we almost always have with most companies in this country is a comparator with Black Lives Matter and a comparator with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So loads of these companies put out statements saying we condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Loads of these companies correctly put out statements saying we support Black Lives Matter. And what's particularly helpful, in my opinion, is making the analogy between Zionism and white supremacy, right? So you just say, look, this is not my opinion. You get expert evidence, whatever. You say, look, Zionism is certainly racist, arguably fascist ideology. It is an ideology of racial supremacy. It is the principle that one race should be treated better than another, and for that reason, it is akin to white supremacy. And then you just make this comparison, this comparator. You look at how a given company has treated Black Lives Matter. Say, okay, so Black Lives Matter, which is another way of saying Black lives are being attacked by white supremacy, and we should oppose that. We should oppose the white supremacist claim that Black lives do not matter by asserting that Black lives do matter. And then you make a direct analogy with Zionism. Zionism is the racially supremacist notion that Palestinian lives do not matter. We say Palestinian lives do matter. My client said on Twitter or whatever it was, Palestinian lives matter. And when you're in court, you just make this analogy. You just say, I had a case recently which we settled, so I can't talk about the specific details, but in generic terms, I can talk about. And I should say in passing, that's what's quite hopeful. Like, if you know someone who's got into trouble for slagging off Israel or Zionism, and they're in trouble at work, they should sue, and they'll probably win. Like employers are running scared of these cases, because anytime you publicize them, it does devastating reputational damage, right? So that's what was happening in this case. I can't name the company or my client or whatever, because we settled the case for a lot of money, like more than a year's wages is what my client won in this case, right? And we just explicitly made this analogy with white supremacy. We just said, look, because some Zionist had called up the company and said, I don't like what your employee is saying on Instagram, And we just, like, in the run-up to the trial, we were just saying, like, okay, well, if a white supremacist calls up your company, says, hey, I'm a white supremacist, I don't think black people are fully human, and I'm not happy that your employee is on Instagram saying that Black Lives Matter, what would you say to that person? Like, think about it. What would you say? You'd just be like, oh, I'm sorry, you're so racist. I don't care what you think. My employee is fine. Like, see you later. Don't ever come to this company, you fascist freak, right? That's what you would say. But for some reason, when Zionists do this, it's like, I'm a Zionist. I love apartheid. I love colonizing. I don't like the fact that your employee thinks that Palestinian lives matter and you should fire him. Why are we like getting our knickers in a twist about this? We just like, you're a Zionist. Who cares what you think? Like, you're a racist. Like, go home. No one cares. Jog on.
Are you allowed to speak within that about the case with quite a well-known football club?
Absolutely, yeah. Like, my client's been very vocal about talking about his own case. So I'm representing a guy called Mark Bonnick, who is a working-class guy from London who worked for Arsenal for more than 2 decades as a kit man with the youth team. And he had a personal Twitter account that he just used to talk about politics like a lot of people do. He wasn't a big name on Twitter. He was just some like down-to-earth working-class guy weighing in on politics because it's something that interests him. And he would talk about lots of different issues that interested him. He talked about Brexit, all the rest of it. And then, like so many of us, he wanted to talk about the genocide that was happening. And he's got really solid head on his shoulders. His politics are very well thought through. And he called it like he saw it. He pointed out some stuff about how the ideology of Zionism is premised on Jewish supremacy, which is obviously correct. He talked about apartheid. He said he articulated a number of criticisms of the apartheid state of Israel that are entirely legitimate, and certainly they're within his right to express himself. And then his tweets were found by one of these malicious Zionist accounts called Never Again 2020 that just goes around boasting about how they're going to dox people to their employers. That's exactly what they did. They said, we're going to dox you and we're going to make you famous or whatever. Went to his employer, which was Arsenal Football Club. And then Arsenal conducted this atrocious speed-run disciplinary process, shoved him out of the company, dismissed him, right? Fired him on Christmas Eve last year. And rather than just take this lying down and just like, because it's horrific, right? To be to be dragged like that in the national media. There were Guardian articles and stuff accusing him of anti-Semitism. And he's just decided to fight back. So we're suing them. We're asserting that he did nothing wrong by manifesting his anti-Zionist beliefs, right, to use the legal jargon. And also, crucially in that case, we're running an argument that that you can't understand the way that he was treated without understanding Arsenal Football Club's anti-Palestinian racism and their deference to the anti-Palestinian racism of the Zionists who were complaining, right? And so we've made what's called an associative race discrimination claim. So we're saying that by criticizing the apartheid state of Israel in the way that he did, he thereby associated himself with the Palestinian people, and that is part of the reason why he faced the discrimination that he did. So I think that case has, again, got quite a lot of attention because people love football. Arsenal Football Club, obviously a very big football club. And what I would say, I think it's important not to get too invested in the legal process, right? It's good to bring legal challenges if we can and to do that in an offensive way and to do that in a strategic way. But I don't think we win on the terrain of law. I think we win on the terrain of politics, on the terrain of our workplaces, on the terrain of our communities. Like, that's where we're most powerful, right? Like, not everyone in this room is going to be a qualified lawyer, but everyone in this room can go into their communities, can go into their workplaces, can go and engage in creating the kind of political coalition that actually defeats Zionism. And I think that's what this Arsenal case is a good example of, right? It's like, it's all well and good for us to bring the case, which we've done. We're suing them and we're going to try and take them to the cleaners, and hopefully he'll get an awful lot of money for the atrocious way that he was treated by that very wealthy football club. But the point is to use that as a starting point for something much bigger. So we're using it to go far beyond what the law can offer, right? All the Employment Tribunal, which is where we're suing them, they can offer him a bunch of money, and that's the main thing they can offer. But we can go so much further than that. We can use it as a pretext for organizing Arsenal supporters, which is what we're doing. We are in a coalition now with Arsenal supporters clubs in all kinds of countries around the world, a lot of them from the Middle East, right? Lebanon, Egypt, like these gooners from around the world who are like, we support Arsenal Football Club and we despise the apartheid state of Israel. And so you use it to organize fans. And I would say that English football clubs need to step up. Like English football fans are nowhere near as militant as some of their competitors in other countries. And you don't have to look far, right? Like Celtic Football Club in Glasgow are the best at this. Within mainstream football, like no one can touch them. Like they're amazing, extremely militant group of, the Green Brigades, right? The militant flank of the Celtic football fan base. Like no one can touch them. They're so powerful. They go into their stadiums and they just unfurl loads of Palestine flags, and they get fined by UEFA, and they just do it again, right? And their own club tries to attack them, but they've, over the years, over the decades, they've gained that territory. Like that. We are this club. We are the supporters, and we get to support Palestine if we want to. We're not going to have UEFA or some bureaucrats in the Celtic management telling us what we can and can't do with our football club. This is owned by the fans. This is our club, and I think that the clubs in England need to take some of that militancy, and that's what we're trying to do with Arsenal Football Club. There's a group called some kind of I think it's called Jewish Gooners or something like that, and it's it claims to be a Jewish supporters group, but functionally it's a Zionist supporters group, right? So again, our enemies are organized, right? Like Jewish Gooners got really on top of this story and said like, whatever it is they said about how they felt about what my client had done, and we're trying to organize the counter movement, right? Why are we not going into these football clubs and saying things I like, watching my local team, opposing a genocide? Like we can be organizing, thinking about the way that the genocide has devastated Palestinian football, right? Linking my client's case to the much broader pre-existing campaign, Show Israel the Red Card, right? Kick this Zionist ethno-state out of UEFA. Like 4 days after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Russia was kicked out of UEFA. Or out of FIFA, sorry. Why has that not happened, right? So I'm really here to encourage us to think critically about law. Law is a terrain of struggle, but it's enemy terrain, right? The laws are written by the bourgeois state. It's extremely hostile terrain. Going into court and making these arguments is difficult. You're hemmed in. You're having to appeal to a judge on terrain that you didn't design. But we don't have to limit ourselves to that terrain. We can organize in our football clubs. We can organize in our communities. We can organize in our workplaces, organize through our trade unions. So at the risk of sounding like a broken record, like we need to escalate. We need to escalate our opposition to this genocide, and we need to do it in a way that's collective. And that's not some mystical formula. It's just thinking like, what organizations am I a part of? What networks am I a part of? What groups am I a part of? How do I go to those groups and ask the question, how can we practically, materially escalate our opposition to this genocide? And that's what we're trying to do in all of my cases. And certainly that's what we're trying to do with Mark Bonnick's case against Arsenal. It's not just, we will sue you and then we win and then we get some money. It's how do we use this to escalate?
And in the context of that, what advice have you got about the incredibly well-funded Zionist groups? UK Lawyers for Israel, for example. I know that they are bringing cases against migrant refugee charities simply because people from those charities have been seen out on the streets shouting from the river to the sea, to kneecap, to everything. They are popping up everywhere. What advice have you got to pretty much everybody in those communities where those very well-funded Zionist organisations are coming after them?
So again, best defense is a good offense. I don't know if you folks have seen that infamous Limmy clip, like Limmy, like Scottish comedian, and he's like, "Don't back down, double down." Like that is literally always the right strategy. Don't back down. Like, why would you back down to a Zionist? Why? Like, you don't back down to a fascist. You don't let the fascist march through Cable Street. So it's the same principle. It's like someone comes to you with these fascist politics. I'm a racial supremacist. I think there should be an apartheid ethno-state that commits genocide and should be allowed to get away with it. Like, you just don't back down to these people. You fight them, right? Like that's what, like you escalate and you fight, right? Like, what are you gonna let these fascists dominate you? Like, no, you spit in their faces and you fight back, right? So that applies to these explicitly Zionist groups like UK Lawyers for Israel. Like, wow, like they literally put it on there, like doing what they say on the tin. Like, you're out here supporting an apartheid state while it commits a genocide. We need to fight these people. We need to confront them. We need to confront them actively, collectively, and strategically, right? Now, I think they're really vulnerable, but some people still capitulate. It's fair enough. You receive a letter from UK Lawyers for Israel, like this very intimidating group. They've got members of the House of Lords on their board of patrons or whatever. If you're like a small company or a small organization or whatever trying to do something and you receive one of these letters saying if this event goes ahead, you're in breach of the Terrorism Act 2000, you're in breach of the Equality Act, you're being anti-Semitic and you're discriminating against Zionists. Like, it's okay to be a bit afraid in that situation. It's like, oh, wow, these people are coming at me and fighting me, right? But courage is something that we cultivate collectively, right? Courage is about facing your fear. It's like, you feel the fear in that situation, and then you get a team around you, you get your trade union involved, you get some lawyers involved, you get some activists involved, you get anti-Zionist Jewish comrades and Palestinian comrades involved, you form a team and you find a way to fight back. And when we do that, we win, and when we capitulate, of course we don't win. Like the only way to win is to fight, right? And so I have an example of where this happened. A group that I was involved with called the Red Clinic, right, which is this kind of communist therapist collective, all right? And we hosted a talk with the Palestinian therapist and academic Nadra Shalhoub Kevorkian, right, who was actually subsequently tortured by the Zionists when she returned to 48. And Lara Shihai and her husband Stephen Shihai, like formidable anarchist psychoanalysts, right? So we had this event at the Freud Museum in London, which is famously the house where Freud died after he fled Nazi Germany, right? So they've turned it into this museum, and it's very common for therapists and others to have these events there. So we organized an event, and then sure enough, a day before the event, UK Lawyers for Israel start emailing the Freud Museum, which is the charity that runs the venue, and saying, blah, 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 Terrorism Act 2000, you need to back down or we're going to report you to the Charities Commission, all this kind of stuff. And unbeknownst to them, like, we had proper anti-Zionist disciplined lawyers on tap. And so we just fought back, and we just said to the venue, it's like, if you cancel this event, like, we're going to make your life hell. Like you want to talk about the Equality Act? Like, you're not allowed to cancel this event just because there's some Arabs speaking, or just because there's some Palestinians speaking, or indeed just because there's some anti-Zionists speaking. So we fought back hard, and there's a Novara Media article that you can read about the whole event. The venue was like, oh, the pressure coming from the anti-Zionist side is more scary than the pressure coming from the Zionist side. We were like, we will sue you if you cancel this event. Like, we will wreck your reputation if you cancel this event. It needs to go ahead. So, like, I think that's the key thing. Like, when these groups come for you, don't respond individually. Otherwise, you're going to lose. We need to respond collectively. And when we do, we win. I think that they're super vulnerable right now. Like, Zionism is in free fall. Everyone hates them. Like, the ordinary person on the street in Britain who perhaps before this genocide didn't really have strong feelings about the genocide or about Zionism is now just like, oh, the hospital bombing child killers. Like, that's what Zionism is viewed as. Like I don't want to overstate it. There's still a residual rump of support for Zionism, but the ordinary people, you see the size of the marches. Like, our marches are massive. I'm not here to uncritically endorse marching. It's nowhere near enough. But it's something, right? It's a show of strength. Like, where's their marches? Where's their every 2 weeks a massive march through the biggest city in Europe? Like, they can't do it because no one likes Zionism anymore. It's like everyone hates it, right? Ordinary people who hadn't thought about it are just no longer on the fence. Like, as I've taken to saying, like, there's no fence left. There's no neutrality left. Like, the fence was obliterated literally on October 7th, right? Palestinians drove a bulldozer through that fence. The fence of a concentration camp. Now, like, no one can claim to be ignorant about what is going on in Palestine. So there's no neutrality left. And I actually think that creates a serious crisis for Zionism and for these Zionist groups. And increasingly, you just go into court, go into the public arena, go into politics, go into your trade union, go into your workplaces, and just make these arguments. Just say, you can be as calm as you want. Or, I'm not here to police your tone. Do what you want. But, like, in my experience, the calmer you sound, the more confident you sound. And we can just calmly say, like, look, no hard feelings. These are all fascists. No one cares what you think. You're insanely racist. Sit down.
What would you say to everybody in the audience who's not a lawyer? Do lawyers have the magic wand, but can we all enact that as non-lawyers, and how do we achieve that in our communities?
So again, I really fear that I sound like a broken record because I've been saying this a lot in public recently. I've been thinking about this the last few years, actually, right? There's this amazing book, this quite a short book that I encourage all of you to read if you haven't already, called Pedagogy of the Oppressed by a guy called Paulo Freire, right?
Read it.
So like the beautiful, like think about it. Pedagogy is all about teaching, right? Like what does it mean for us to teach, and what does it mean for us to learn together? And it's like this pedagogy of the oppressed, right? This approach to learning and to teaching that is premised upon the liberation of the oppressed of the world, right? And he was pioneering this technique over decades spent teaching in various countries, but in particular in Brazil, right, in Latin America. And he was going into these peasant communities, these people who worked the land and who didn't know how to read or write. And he noticed that what the dominant approach to education, he called it like the banking deposit model theory of education, where these educators think of their students as having these like empty banking deposit boxes. Like their brain is like an empty box, and then the educator has this commodity called knowledge that they deposit in the empty box of their students' minds, right? Extremely patronizing, premised upon like this kind of this analogy with capitalism, right? Like money is the main purpose, and commodity is like knowledge is this kind of like monified commodity, right? And he suggests that we need to completely oppose the banking deposit box school of education, and we need to replace it with a pedagogy of the oppressed, which is all about entering into dialogue. And it's a dialogue that's about asking people what their problems are. And when he went into these peasant communities and said, "Well, what's your problem?" You can't anticipate what their problem is. It may be that they don't actually need to learn how to read. It may be they need to learn how to do something else. It may be they need to learn how to fire a gun. Like, who's to say what the solution to the problem is? You don't know what someone's problem is until you actually ask, right? And so he points out that when you actually embed yourself in communities in that way, you dissolve the relationship between the student and the teacher. Like, we are all students and we are all teachers. We're all teaching each other things and we're all learning from each other. And you have to dissolve that hierarchy between student and teacher if you're serious about liberation. Because otherwise you're dominating the student. You set yourself up as an authority as the teacher, and you come to tell the student what they need to learn. You've already fallen at the first hurdle, right? So what I've been thinking about recently is the need to apply essentially the same process to this so-called lawyer-client relationship. Like, really think about that. Like, what does it mean to dissolve the relationship between lawyer and client? And to recognize that we are all dominated by the laws that the bourgeois state passes. We're all dominated by the Terrorism Act 2000 when we try and have a conversation about what's happening in Palestine, when we try and have a conversation about Palestine Action or NECAP. We're being dominated by those laws. If we say the wrong words, the cops will show up with the law that says they're allowed to use force to violently arrest you, and they'll dominate us. So that's a problem. We're being dominated. And we're all out here interpreting the problem of that domination. We're all lawyers in that sense. We're all interpreting the law and trying to find a solution to the problem that the law is posing us, right, individually and collectively. So I'm not being facetious or playful by trying to suggest that everyone here is a lawyer. Like, I really mean it. I learn so much from my clients, like, every day. I'm so in awe of my clients. I'm in awe of their humanity, their courage, their desires. And it's an honor to explore their problems with them, even as I admit to them what my problems are, right? Like, I started this conversation with you folks by talking about the fact that I'm completely exhausted. Like, that's a problem. Like, I'm not trying to censor myself, but it's like, I'm really exhausted. There's not enough anti-capitalist, anti-Zionist lawyers. I'm working too hard. I'm staying up too late. I feel really guilty about the Holocaust that we're witnessing in Gaza. Like, these are some of my problems, right? I'm trying to enter into a problem-posing dialogue with you. And so I would encourage you to sort of, leave this dialogue thinking of yourself as a lawyer. Like, don't defer to lawyers. If you find yourselves, if we escalate our opposition to this genocide, if we escalate our opposition to capitalist domination more generally, and we find ourselves needing to go into court, don't let your lawyer tell you what to do. Like, they're supposed to ask you, hey, what do you want to do? How do you want to play it, right? You can do whatever you want. Like, we are radically free to escalate our opposition to this genocide if we want to, and in my opinion, lawyers are the problem. I don't identify as a lawyer. I identify as a communist, right? I am committed to contributing to joining the coalition of the international working class that storms power and smashes capitalism and replaces it with something far more hopeful and beautiful that is better at meeting human needs. And I'm an anti-Zionist who is committed to the Palestinian struggle to smash Zionism, to smash the apartheid state of Israel, and to hold responsible the architects of this genocide in the United States, in NATO, in the British Empire. And like, where does being a lawyer fit into that? Like, job's a job. Like, you have to have a prior set of politics, and then what you do like your job doesn't need to be this like this kind of bourgeois trap, right? It's like such a bourgeois question to ask people, like, what do you do, right? We all see it, you're at a house party or something, and it's like, and we all ask it sometimes, like, oh, what do you do? But it's like, what are you really asking with that question? What do you do? And I've often taken to just playfully, when someone asks me that, what do you do? It's like, oh, I'm a communist. And they're like, yeah, but like, what do you do? And it's like, well, that is what I do. Like, I wake up every day and I try and think, like, what does it mean to live with love and humility and to contribute to overcoming oppression? Like, so lawyers, very skeptical of that term. Lenin has this brilliant letter that he wrote to some comrades in a Moscow prison cell who were facing a trial, and he sort of gives them some advice on how to like deal with their lawyer. And you basically, like, a lot of lawyers will try and take control over your case. Like, don't let them. It's your case. Like you should be free to run your case however you want, even if it means taking risks. Like, don't let a lawyer tell you what to do. Don't let a cop tell you what to do. Don't let anyone tell you what to do.
I totally agree, but the cops, the legal system, all of it is based on hierarchy and designed to keep us, we're meant to be in fear and scared of those people in wigs. How do we overcome that?
How do we overcome what?
The entire system, from the cops upwards, we are meant to live in fear. Terrorism Act is designed to keep us fear. We're meant to be living in fear at the moment. Enough of us are rising up and going, fuck that, I will continue, I will take action. How do we counteract when you get to that final stage? Because the entire legal system is based on hierarchy and wigs, it's archaic.
I think, the short answer is that I'm a communist, so I do think that we need to forge organizations that are capable of taking collective political action. And I don't have easy answers about what those organizations should look like, but broadly, I'm for the political organization of the international working class. That's quite an abstract answer. Like, broadly, I would encourage people who haven't already to join revolutionary organizations, whatever your politics might be. Like, collectivize the struggle so that you don't feel isolated. Like, I think, it's a cliche, but what is it? United we stand and divided we fall, right? We need to develop a way of operating in a more collective manner. As far as the courts are concerned, like, my mantra here is that we need to have a prior political strategy, and any legal tactics need to be subordinate to that prior political strategy, right? So anytime there's a tension between what your lawyer is telling you should do, that should be smothered entirely by your prior understanding of what your political strategy is. And I think Palestine Action is a really good example of this. Like, Palestine Action have their strategy, it's really, really clear. They're like, we're going to go into Elbit Systems UK Limited and identify other nodes in their supply chain as well. So not just the company itself, but the adjacent companies that are supplying it. We're going to go into those companies and we're going to cause damage. We're going to directly disrupt their ability to produce the weapons that are fueling the genocide. And then in the course of enacting that prior political strategy, they get prosecuted by the British state, and their approach to that prosecution is subordinate to a prior political strategy. So they have wonderful lawyers. I know many of their lawyers, and I've represented Palestine Action in some matters over the years, and I'm good friends with Huda and Richard and some of the wonderful comrades in that group, and they're formidable because they have strategic clarity, right? So I think strategic clarity is important. Entering into groups and then asking ourselves, like, what is our strategy? That's vital. I think a lot of the left is fragmented and impotent, and we don't think strategically, but the best bits of the left do have this ability to think strategically. And strategy can, again, sound like this slightly abstract word. Like, we need a strategy. What does that really actually mean? A lot of people maybe talk about strategy, but don't break it down. And I struggle with it. What's the winning strategy? Like, I call myself a communist. Is that the winning strategy? I don't know. I'm just some guy, right? We have to try and work it out collectively. But to the extent that I've given thought to strategy, there's a very good book by Mike McNair called Revolutionary Strategy, where he kind of talks about this very thorough Marxist history of the 20th century, where he looks at like various groups, the Bolshevik Party, whatever, like Allende, all this kind of stuff, and says, like, these are the strategic decisions you're going to have to make. This is what we learn from like historic attempts to seize power, failed and successful, less successful. So that's a great book if you want to theorize what is strategy. And another really interesting definition of strategy comes from this book called Why David Sometimes Wins, right? Which is alluding to the biblical David and Goliath metaphor, or like allegory, I should say. Like, how does the little guy win? Like, and In some ways, I think that's an unhelpful analogy because we're not the little guy. We're the international working class. Like, we are the overwhelming mass of humanity. Like, as Malcolm X was fond of saying, we're not outnumbered, we're out-organized. We outnumber them massively. And that's why they're so terrified of these marches. Like, I was in Berlin recently where the marches are much, much smaller. And, you know, Berlin's an interesting place. Like, a lot of very narcissistic German people who are obsessed with their own guilt about the Holocaust and are using that to justify another Holocaust, which is interesting. But the point is their marches are much smaller and the cops are much more violent. Like, it's insane. The violence of the German police is genuinely staggering, right? In Britain, like, I'm not here to apologize for the Met Police, but the Met Police hasn't really touched those marches. There's been some arrests and stuff. I'm really not here to apologize for the cops. But why have they not violently attacked those marches? Those marches are a real problem for the British state. Why have they not violently attacked them? Because they're too big. Like, there's too many of us, and they're not. Our enemies aren't stupid. They're like, oh, if we attack this, there's too many of them. We will show that there are physically not enough police to contain this movement, right? And there was a concern that if you start banning peaceful opposition to the genocide, that you'll drive people into the peaceful direct action groups like Palestine Action and other groups that have sprung up since they were banned. So I think our enemies are terrified of the fact that there's this kind of Streisand effect or whatever. Every time they try and suppress something, it comes back stronger. They tried to suppress kneecap, they came back stronger. And in the process, they gave us Bob Dylan as well. Like, Bob Dylan was obviously just lying around. And then it was like, oh, no, quickly, take kneecap off the main stage. Put someone else on BBC. And it was like, death to the IDF. And it's like, that's now just like a viral chant, right? So it's like, every time they try and suppress us, it just gets stronger. And the same thing, I think, is happening with Palestine Action. This attempt to ban the cutting edge of Palestine solidarity in this group seems to be backfiring. And we had the astonishing scenes last weekend of more than 500 people, I think it was 700 people in the end, being arrested. Afterwards, the Met Police saying, oh, we think we may have messed up here. Yvette Cooper completely on the back foot. Like, we heard some of the previous panelists, we heard Craig Murray earlier, like, releasing these documents just saying they're lying to you, it's a lie. I would say note of caution, like, we should not normalize the Terrorism Act 2000 whatsoever. We shouldn't say, oh, there are some groups that are terrorists that this legislation properly targets, and the problem is merely that Palestine Action have been improperly targeted. We should be collectively articulating the demand that the Terrorism Act 2000 be abolished. Like, it should not exist, never should have existed. It's a piece of Blairite legislation, and it's a full frontal attack on national resistance movements and your right to free speech. But I got distracted by talking about David and Goliath and my problem with the title, Why David Sometimes Wins. But broadly, that book is about organizing precarious fruit pickers in the United States, right? Most of whom didn't speak English, and they were sort of treated like this unorganizable constituency by the mainstream North American trade unions. And then there was a successful attempt to organize them, hence David winning, right? So David won in this astonishing case, and this guy, Marshall Gantz, writes this definition of strategy, right? And that's what I was saying, we need to be strategic. So he says, Marshall Gantz says, strategy is using what we have to get what we need to get what we want. Like, that's so disarmingly simple. Like, but how few groups actually sit down and go, what's our strategy? What do we have? What do we need? What do we want? And so, again, this mantra this thing that I've been trying to repeat, because this is my main suggestion. I'm here to suggest that we need to escalate our opposition to this crisis, to this genocide. We need to do it in a way that's collective, and we need to do it in a way that's strategic. And so what that means practically is going away to the organizations that you're involved with, and if you're not involved with an organization, finding one and being like, if I were to join an organization that I think is doing effective work to oppose this genocide, what group would I join? Think about that. So go to the existing groups that you're involved with, trade union in your workplace, community group, religious group, faith group, go to your church, your mosque, your synagogue. And if you can't think of a group that you're involved with, go and find one and then pose these strategic questions. Go to a meeting and with humility, like, don't be the new guy who showed up and hasn't lurked. Like, have some humility, enter into a dialogue with them and think about what your strategy should be. What is our strategy? What do we want? Like, what do we currently have and what do we need, which is like this bridge between what we have and what we want. In a nutshell, that's why I say to all of my clients, whenever new cases come to me, whatever, and I say, okay, what do you want? Like, it's not for me to tell you what you want. What do you want? And then sometimes I say, I want all this mad, crazy, ambitious stuff. And I'm like, okay, you can't really do that with a court. But, that might form some part of your strategy. But to do that, you would need this. And then you're thinking strategically. You're like, hey, how do we solve our problems together? So I hope that wasn't an overly
like playful answer, but broadly, again, I'm just literally repeating myself now, but escalate. We need to urgently escalate. It's a genocide. It couldn't be more urgent. We need to do that in a way that's collective. It's not just individual escalation, it's collective escalation. That means going into groups and thinking strategically about what do we have, what do we need, and ultimately what do we want.
I wish we could sit and listen to you all afternoon. Glenn is waving us, but thank you, Frank, and thank you to everyone for listening, but huge thanks to Franck Magennis.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Franck Magennis. Thank you, sir. Thank you. And thank you to Fréa Lockley. That was a top conversation.